Hello everyone and welcome back to another Star Wars The Black Series action figure review. Since she popped up briefly at the end of my last video, I thought it appropriate to give you guys a look at Shin Hati today from the Ahsoka series. Really happy to finally have this figure in the collection. Alongside Baylan Skoll, Shin was one of my favourite new characters to be introduced in the Ahsoka series, and the character translates really nicely into action figure form, especially with this release. This is a reissued figure with some slight modifications, and I'm thankful that this one was reissued because I missed out on the original release, and this one is how the figure should have been released in the first place. Some would argue that the right modifications still haven't been made to this figure, and we'll get onto that throughout this review, but I for one am really happy to finally have this character represented on the shelf. She looks great alongside Baylan and the rest of the Ahsoka cast, and I can't wait to share this figure with you in more detail. So without further ado, let's dive into it, and we'll kick things off as always by taking a look at the packaging that Shin comes in. So with regards to packaging, pretty standard fare, not a great deal to talk about with this one. The real talking point with regards to the box is the fact that this figure comes in the updated Black Series packaging, whereas the original release of Shin came in the angled edge boxes. This one, as you can see, features the Ahsoka colour band around the edge of the box. We have the number in the series and name of the character just up the side of the window, and then down the spine we have this really nice mural image of Shin with her robe, lightsaber ignited, looking very, very cool. On the back of the box we have that image once again, accompanied by a brief description of the character. So like I said, pretty standard stuff and not a great deal to write home about. But the figure inside is a really nice addition to the collection. So let's jump into the review and take a look at Shin Hati. So here she is, and once again I'm really happy to finally have this figure in the collection. She looks great side by side with Baylan Skoll. It's really nice to finally have Master and Apprentice side by side on the shelf. As I mentioned at the start of the review, there are a couple of quirks with this one and a couple of issues that should have been rectified with the reissue in my opinion, but if you saw my review on Baylan Skoll then you'll know those issues didn't plague me too much. I'm not going to spend a hell of a lot of time in this review complaining about those issues because for me they're a bit of a non-factor. For me the main selling point on this one was not only the fact that I missed out on the original release, but also that this reissue comes with the soft goods robe, and as I said at the start of the review, this is how I think the figure should have been released in the first place. So kudos to Hasbro for cashing in and getting as much money out of collectors as they possibly can by having to purchase two Shin Hati figures if they wanted the soft goods robe. I missed out on the first release thankfully due to sort of popularity at the time. Ahsoka was pretty hot off the press when the initial releases of Baylan and Shin came out, and so demand got in the way and I wasn't able to pick up those original figures. This one thankfully is still kicking about, and it's also available pretty cheaply if you want to add it to your own collection. There's a link as always down below in the video description. She's currently on offer over at staractionfigures.co.uk, so grab her while you can if you want to add this character to your collection. I do recommend doing so because like I said, not only is she a great character in the series, but this is a really cool figure as well. Now I will address the main issue with this one before we get into the articulation and details, and that is the height. Obviously, if you picked up the original Baylan and Shin figures, you know that Baylan is a little bit on the short side, and for my money, Shin feels a little bit on the tall side. There's not a massive amount of height difference between the two figures, but when you pair Shin with Sabine and with Ahsoka and other characters from the show, she does feel a little bit tall, at least taller than she appears in the show. So I would have liked to have seen that issue rectified with the re-release. It's not anything that really puts me off the figure itself, but it would have been a nice little touch for Hasbro to go back and correct that. The details, the sculpt, the articulation, and just the paint applications and the addition of the soft goods on this one make up for the height issue in my opinion, and like I said, I'm not going to spend too long focusing on the negatives with this figure because it is a worthy addition to the collection and a really nicely done figure in its own right. So before we dive into the articulation and the sculpt of this figure, we'll just spend a little bit of time talking about this soft goods robe. As you can see, it's a really nice fit. if you've seen my review on Baylan Skoll, or if you've picked that figure up for yourself, then you sort of know what to expect with this cloak. It's a really nice premium material, very thin, but very heavy in the sense that it drapes really nicely over the figure. Even the hood looks really good, which is usually a problem for Hasbro. They never seem to get the hoods right on these cloaked figures, whereas this one is absolutely spot on, and I'm really happy with how the robe turned out. This really adds, in my opinion, to that all-important shelf presence with this figure, and like I said, it's how the figure should have been released the first time around. But on the shelf, as part of the display, it looks absolutely fantastic. But then obviously, to get a good look at the sculpted details in the costume and all of the articulation that this figure has to offer, it does help to remove the robe. So as you can see, with the robe removed, that gives us a much better look at the detail in the costume and the articulation of the figure. One of the things that I really liked about the characters of Baylan and Shin in the Ahsoka series was their overall aesthetic. I absolutely love this sort of medieval knight look that both characters have, and that translates really nicely into action figure form. It's a very toyetic look, and Hasbro have done a great job bringing that to life with all this sculpted detail on the figure. One thing I will slightly complain about with this one, however, is the fact that because her and Baylan are sort of complementary characters, Baylan had tons of weathering applied to his armour, and that went a really long way in bringing depth, life and realism to the figure and making it look like Baylan had jumped off the screen and into our collections. Unfortunately, Shin hasn't received the same treatment. Her costume is very clean, looks a little bit plasticky in places. She does have some weathering on some of the armour, but for the most part she's a very clean figure, and that's a little bit of a shame. It would have been nice to have seen a little bit more weathering applied to this figure, just to breathe a bit of life into it, but for the most part it's still sculpted really nicely. I just feel those paint applications would have gone a really long way to take this figure to that next level. The head sculpt in particular is absolutely fantastic. I was a little bit hesitant about this one at first because from press images I'd seen of it, the hair looked a little bit like a wig, but in person and through the camera lens it looks a lot better, and the head sculpt itself is really nicely done. I think a little bit of extra depth and detail in the hair itself would have gone a long way, but the character does have pretty bleached blonde hair in the show anyway, so I'll let that pass. The addition of the Padawan braid is a really nice touch, but like I said, that likeness is pretty bang on to the actress who portrays Shin in the series. All those features are captured really nicely. She's got very piercing eyes. We have those beauty marks and freckles on the face itself, which look great. And yeah, those features and details are captured really nicely. So points to Hasbro on that one. They definitely did a great job with both Baylan and Shin's likeness, and it'll be interesting to see how a future figure of Baylan turns out given the recent recasting of the character. Now with regards to the rest of the figure, as you can see, once again she's sculpted really nicely. All the appropriate details are there on the armour. You've got that fake material texture sculpted into the skirt. Really nice details on the chest piece there. On the shoulder plates, as you can see, again, light weathering applied, but nothing too major. We've got some nice comlink details on the wrists. Great detail applied around the back of the costume as well, as you can see there. Really solid sculpting work on this one. Thrilled with how it turned out from that perspective. Now, with regards to accessories, she does come obviously with the soft goods robe, but she also features a lightsaber, which in and of itself is a really nicely detailed piece. You've got all those really nice details captured on the hilt. You've got the loop there at the bottom, which can be attached to a peg on Shin's belt. The blade can of course be removed, and the colour has been rectified on this one as well. The initial release came with a much redder lightsaber blade. This one's a little bit more on the orange side as seen in the show. And yeah, visually Sculpt wise, paint applications aside, really nice. The paint applications the figure does have aren't bad, but it would have just been nice to have seen a little bit more applied. But in terms of her overall look, absolutely thrilled with how this one turned out. Now, as I mentioned, you can hook Shin's lightsaber hilt onto her belt like so, and it holds in place pretty nicely. And with weapon aside, that allows us to explore the articulation on this figure. So as standard, we have a ball joint at the base of the neck and the bottom of the head. Thankfully, the sculpt of the hair doesn't get in the way or hinder any of that articulation, so there's a nice fluid range of movement going on there. We have really nice deep cut butterfly joints at the shoulders, which I always appreciate personally, especially with lightsaber wielding figures, because it allows you to pose the figure holding the lightsaber with both hands a lot easier. The shoulder armour, as you can see, is on a loop system, very similar to the clones and stormtroopers that I've given you a look at recently, and as such there is a really nice range of movement at the shoulders themselves. You can get this one in all the appropriate battle poses that you'd want. We have hinges at the elbows and at the wrist. We have a nice ball joint at the torso. We also have ball jointed hips, and there's a split down the side of the skirt, so you can get a really nice wide stance out of the legs. Unfortunately, there is no swivel cut at the upper thigh, though personally that's not an articulation point that I miss. Again, I'm sure it affects different figures in different ways, but it's not missed with this one, at least with my personal experience with the figure. We also have hinges at the knees and hinges and rockers at the ankles. So pretty standard stuff really in terms of the articulation, but that wide range of posability really allows you to get this figure in some really cool poses. And like I said, from an articulation standpoint and overall sculpt perspective, I'm really happy with how this figure turned out. I just think she could have done with a few extra paint applications to really take her to the next level. So that concludes this review on Shin Hati from the Black Series. Once again, a great addition to the line, and I'm going to say it, height discrepancies be damned, I'm thrilled with how both of these figures turned out. I understand the frustration with regards to the height issue at this stage in the line. It's not the sort of thing that Hasbro should be overlooking, but from a sculpt perspective, an articulation and accessory standpoint, these are really cool figures in their own right, and they look great as part of the collection. So if you'd like to add them to your own display, be sure to hit the link down below in the video description. At the time of filming this review, both Baylan and Shin are in stock and available to buy, and I also invite you to go back and check out my review on Baylan Skoll to see what this figure is all about, because it is a really good one, despite that slightly short stance. I'll be back with some more reviews very soon. I hope you've enjoyed this one. Until then, as always, keep collecting, and may the Force be with you.